G'day, welcome to the Off-Chain Podcast. Don here with you, and my guest co-hosts today are Trent and Sean Gardner, the founding members of MODA DAO. MODA DAO is a not-for-profit think tank tackling all things music, blockchain, and Web3. So MODA DAO is working at the intersection of music and blockchain, seeing how Web3 technology can help to address some of the biggest challenges facing the music industry today. So we've also roped in our resident LA guru, Andy Anderson from Faculty Entertainment. He leads our work with artists, musicians, and their entertainment agencies, trying to help them explore how Web3 can deliver real-world value and solutions for both musicians and fans. It's going to be a very entertaining, very informational, like we're going to peel back some of the layers of the music entertainment industries. It should be very eye-opening. So here's and enjoy our conversation with Trent, Sean, and Andy. Welcome to Off-Chain Podcast. Really great to have you. First, let's just start with where in the world are you at the moment?
I can go first if you like, Don.
Yeah.
I'm Sean, and I'm in Sydney, in the inner west.
I can jump in next. Great to be on here, Dom. I'm in Sydney as well with Sean.
So in Australia, Sydney,
Australia in
East
Sydney.
Coast.
Yeah, correct.
Great. Great to have some Aussies on the show, by the way. Well done. And Andy, where are you at? I gave it away in the intro, but
you did. But Andy Anderson in Los Angeles, specifically on the west side.
Yeah. Okay. So for Sean and Trent, what's your background? Like, how do you come right now to be in the Web3 blockchain space and also music space? What's your background? Did you come in through the tech side? Did you come in through the music side, production side? Let's start with you, Sean.
Yeah, I mean, it's been over 5 years now. It's going to be kind of like 6 years come, June or July since I stepped into the space. And we've been, at the intersection of blockchain and music the whole time. I've kind of come from a background of just having a love of music my whole life. My mum's a singer-songwriter, played guitar as a kid, DJ'd, wrote music, all the rest of it. But I had a career in advertising in the tech side, like digital production at big advertising agencies and everything, probably for 12 years or so. And always had the itch to be an entrepreneur and always had, the itch to do more with music. Just when I went down that rabbit hole in 2017 and started learning all about the technology, it was just kind of like glaringly obvious that I needed to do something with music and stop working for other people and start trying to change the world a little bit. And that's really like the short story.
All right. That's amazing. How about for you, Trent?
I came in probably from more of the tech side. My background had sort of been in early stage sort of startups that sort of had gone on to bigger publisher groups. I got to sink my teeth into the music kind of industry when I went over to News Limited, who just acquired a festival ticketing business called Moshtix here in Australia. So I was brought on to sort of lead that evolution of bringing it into news and starting to work with music festivals, everything sort of from, your field days, your good vibrations in that sort of early days. So I was there for about 5.5 years and then went over and spent a bit of time over at Sound Alliance, which was a company that, used to run a website called In the Mix, Faster, Louder, really sort of on the pulse of, music content back in sort of that sort of early sort of mid to late sort of 2000s, which was sort of really interesting. And I think that's what really sort of inspired me. I ended up spending a lot of time, with friends that were musicians and, people that were doing really well and people that were sleeping on couches. And, it was probably from there that, the sort of love of, how can we sort of change this musical middle class system. But moved on, decided to spend a bit of time over at eBay for a number of years of sort of helping them spearhead Gumtree in Australia. And I'd always, kind of similar to Sean, played around with music, started writing music, DJing back in the early days. And when we got together through a mutual friend, our other co-founder, Jimmy Frew, who'd been a musician for the last sort of 14 years, our sort of heads came together in 2017 and we started sort of looking at, blockchain and this cross section of music, and really trying to solve some of those core problems that were sort of glaring. Everything from why does it take 6 months or 7 months for an artist to get paid? Why are they still getting paper checks in the mail? What's this black box? And we sort of came from really sort of, I guess, humble beginnings and probably a little bit of naivety, about the music industry. But yeah, as Sean sort of touched on, it's been 6 years down this crypto music rabbit warren, and yeah, God, it's been a roller coaster.
Yeah. Andy, how about yourself, mate?
Yeah, so I kind of came to this from a career in entertainment. So I really started out in movies and worked for 8 years as a studio producer on a bunch of big tentpole films with U.S. studios, helped them access sort of emerging markets with their films. But in that time, I was always working with the talent and sometimes even doing kind of deals with them directly. So if they were in territory to promote a movie, I would work with them to do appearances, endorsements, or just try to find some like brand money for them. It was kind of like, hey, if you want to roll up to the premiere in this car and rather than that car, I can actually get you $1 million check. And so always just sort of working with the talent and their businesses, moved on to label services and worked with a bunch of big DJs and pop stars, and really started to learn a lot more about kind of the intricacy of rights and royalties within the music industry. And, that's what Trent's also touching on, but like, that's a whole rabbit hole. And I hope we get into at least a little bit of that today. And then worked with Celebrity Ventures. So a bunch of big celebrities who had been starting their own companies and then looking to either create new revenue streams for those companies or, kind of helping them access new markets, sometimes with new technologies for those companies. So when I came into faculty group, it was really about taking a look at some of the investments that they've already made in entertainment, and then sort of formalizing what entertainment and the blockchain looks like. And then with a heavy focus on talent, both emerging, sort of that mid-tier, and then also A-list talent, and understanding sort of how they can use blockchain-enabled features to make more money, but also drive a better connection with fans through that whole process. We're in a place now where we've just come out of this crazy sort of hype cycle, and fans were left in sort of unsafe territories and interacting with artists in a very lackluster, really lacked meaning in sort of that interaction. So I think the big buzzwords for this coming year or years is going to be, artists and fans working together in a safe and meaningful way. And so I've got a whole 45-minute rant on that, but we won't touch on that just yet. But anyway, so that's how I got here.
All right. So you three are the right guys to talk to about music and blockchain and just the future of music as well. I mean, music, as I think about it, I worked in radio for about 15 years, all throughout radio. You go back 100 years, musicians were at the forefront of technology, really. Go back 70 years and then 30 years. And then all, throughout radio and into the 80s, you'd have, kids with their new cassettes recording music from the radio. In the 90s, CDs come out and people are, pirating or making their own, mixtapes and whatnot. And, we start to see, man, the whole kind of industry change, and then advent of the internet and things like, P2P and piracy and streaming and iTunes and all kinds of things like this. Man, the whole music industry has had some, pretty significant shifts over the last even just couple of decades, and increasingly so. How are you supposed to keep up, basically, as a musician, or from your respective backgrounds? Obviously, there's opportunities at each new kind of epoch in technology. What do you think it is about music specifically, or music production and distribution, that seems to lag the technology all the time? Seems that musicians, artists, production companies are always trying to play catch up with the latest in technology. You guys are trying to get ahead of the technology. How is it that such a significant and I don't know, multi-billion-dollar industry is always playing catch up.
I don't know if there's any like one reason, but I was thinking about this actually just before we started recording, and the thing that I think is interesting about the technology wave that's happening at the moment is like, and I think this partially answers your question, is like, throughout all of those different iterations of the industry, it's always been like a new technology that's been pushed out through, say, an electronics company, or been pushed out through coming through the industry and going, hey, like, we've got records, but cassettes are easier to put in your car, and you've got cassettes, but now we've got CDs. You can store more on them, and you don't have to rewind them and fast forward them, and then streaming's been pushed out, and so yeah, artists are kind of just adapting to what's being pushed towards them from the industry. Now, although like the vast majority of artists are still trying to wrap their heads around NFTs and Web3, and it's only really a niche that are fully involved in it at the moment, it's actually the first time where it's actually coming a little bit more from the creators or even from the fans towards the industry. And I think that's like a really massive shift. Like, artists didn't come up with the idea of CDs and say, hey, this is a cool way to store music. So it's kind of a bit of a shift. So I think maybe for the first time, it's less about artists and creators having to catch up with the latest technology trend. It's almost a more like, this is an opportunity to actually push it forward and say, we want to do this because it brings us closer to our fans, and enables us to have more control and all of those sorts of things. So, it could potentially, this is actually a little bit of a turning of the tide.
Okay, so
I agree with some of that and some of Sean's thinking around that, and I think technology's played a huge part in the way that I guess things have been driven forward. But I do also think if previously there has been a lack of incentive for I guess record labels and the music industry to really change. They had it pretty good in the the late 80s. They had it really good in the early 90s, and technology sort of come along to really sort of disrupt that wheelhouse in the forms of I think it was really Napster and Kazaa and all the other ones that sort of followed, that really sort of shook the card on that sort of archaic system. And it's also, I think, around that everyone really knows it has been a bit of a broken system when you look internally. Plenty of middlemen, bottleneck, black boxes, all these things that have sort of come together to sort of cause this sort of shift into what Sean was sort of alluding, this sort of uprising of independent artists and creators starting to sort of really kind of take control and breaking down some of these walled gardens that we see and say, I'm looking for a new way to connect with my audience, to be able to sell my music. Why does there need to be this sort of middleman of third party? Like, obviously third parties have sort of helped in the growth. Spotify has been incredible in transforming it, but I think we're now at this sort of crossroad where you're seeing the increase of huge numbers in like independent artists. I think it's gone up to about 40% now that now have the opportunity to really offer this sort of one-on-one sort of relationship with the fan and artist. And I think it's quite exciting how it's all sort of changing very, very quickly.
So where do the old managers, where do the legacy record labels, where do they sit in the new ecosystem, or in the present way of how music is being distributed then?
I'm seeing like a lot of the majors dipping their toe in the water. They've done everything from sort of PFP collections, buying land in Sandbox, looking at creating whatever sort of metrics or avenues that they can, because I think if you look at it, they're probably the ones, like, they'll always have a place. I don't think record labels or some of the managers that you sort of speak are going to fully disappear. There will be some middlemen that will probably be looking to need to pivot into something new as this sort of technology sort of builds and builds. But I think it's still early days in how this is sort of all going to play out. But make no mistake, the record labels are definitely being a part of this and have sort of jumped on it like quite you could say quite early in the space to sort of find out, that nobody wants to sort of, if you're in a record label, nobody wants to see another Napster sort of appear out of nowhere and sort of really start cutting into their lunch. So what we're seeing is a lot of these labels sort of sitting on the periphery, dipping their toe in the water, trying new things, bringing on artists, trying to work out how they do NFT drops, how they support these in, metaverse concerts and things like that. So it's I don't think that whole area of the industry is just going to disappear like that. Sort of probably that utopian view which we saw in the early 2017 that all record labels will be gone and it's just going to be peer to peer. I think there's definitely still a place for those actors. I think that it's just going to be a lot more transparent than it ever was before.
Yeah, right.
I think the industry is kind of, it's moving in step with the technology, because even before blockchain technology started to really emerge and become more popular, we saw record labels starting to back off of really early artist development and really waiting for artists to go and develop their own careers, develop their own audiences. And they have tools like Instagram, but most especially is TikTok, and able to kind of build those audiences and start to monetize against those audiences. And so for labels, they were able to mitigate a lot of the risk by saying, hey, why don't you go develop yourselves? And then we will be here. And when you're ready, you look more of like a sure shot, then we will come in and we'll give you that advance. But what's happened since then is now there's all this more technology. So now people are getting more and more tools, and now they're able to have a closer connection with their audiences. There's a whole bunch of new funding and alternative sources of funding available, so they're not as reliant on label advances. And those creative services have now come out of those labels, and those label services are now sort of in the free market, off the shelf. There's really great SaaS platforms, and there's great small startup companies who are helping these artists. So now artists can wait longer to go to that label and be less reliant on that label and keep some of the leverage that they would have in conversation with that label whenever is that right time. So then if they do end up going with a major label, which they probably will, they have more of an equal footing and relationship with those folks. And then they become in business together rather than taking a big advance and then working the rest of your career to pay that back.
Right. So, I mean, that if we put that together with what you were saying before, Trent, in terms of, say, what are the incentives for an artist that puts a music video that they've self-produced onto, or at least self-funded onto YouTube, they get 5 million views, they start, getting people coming to them from these majors saying, hey, come on over. Where are the current incentives in the current structure or the way that things are going now for them? Like, is it still, the goal is to land on a major, or are there significant enough incentive structures for an artist with, millions of views now and say hundreds of thousands of fans to not think the goal is to get signed?
I think it really depends on the individual. Like what we're seeing still is there is a massive pull to being part of a record label. You're still seeing people getting signed all the time, and not going down the independent path. I think the independent path, you can have all these millions of followers and everything like that, but it really depends on, I guess, how you're monetizing it. Like, I think where record labels play a really good part is really that sort of exposure level and, building a team around you and, taking it to sort of the next level. And, I know plenty of artists that, all they want to do is write music and, having a record label there do everything else, really sort of works for them. And then there's other people that are kind of like the DIY, want to do everything themselves and don't really feel they need to, involve a record label or have them take a cut. So, I think it's really sort of, horses for courses, as they say, on what path the individual artist wants to choose and what their core goals are. But I think, what Andy was talking about, it's not so much apparent anymore that you have to take that path. I think, 10, 15 years ago, it was a label, it was the label or nothing, there was kind of no other alternative route. And what we are starting to see is these huge amount of alternatives and opportunities to be able to go and be self-sufficient without doing that. And if you choose to do a label at a later date, you've actually got some leverage and some weight behind you rather than getting tied up in those deals that are going to kind of cost you for the rest of your life.
What are some of those financial incentives or revenue streams that these artists can be looking at without being signed?
A lot of the ones that we're seeing at the moment is, looking at how they release music, how they do a compilation. Some are releasing singles themselves. They're doing these as sort of NFTs, limited releases. Tying them with access to shows, meet and greets. They're all doing sort of, everyone's different. There's no one really doing the same. There's obviously a few sites that have appeared recently, like Sound. XYZ that's doing a great job from a NFT point of view, allowing people to do open editions and individual. Then some of these artists are picking up a few grand, and it's dwarfing what they've done by themselves on Spotify, where they would just distribute the music before and hope that they look at their royalty check and sort of see that sort of they're not really generating much revenue, but with a drop, they're making that kind of money instantly and sort of really building a strong fan base and an ability to sort of connect with them. So there's more and more tools. I guess the hard thing in that sort of early days is there is so much opportunity out there, and it can be very noisy for an artist who's just starting out, looking to go, where do I start? How do I get involved? You're pulled in so many different directions, and I think that's the hard part at the moment around sort of education and understanding. There is a level still at the moment. I think you need to understand as an artist, custodian wallets and ownership, and what you own versus what you don't own. And we're seeing it time and time again where even some artists that are assigned to labels that think they're not, they do have their rights to do something and go out and do something, and sure enough the label sort of stepped in or stopped a drop happening based on the fact that they haven't realized that they are actually signed and they don't have approval to go and do these things. So there is a lot of sort of limitations around depending on whether you're signed or an independent artist that we're seeing time and time again. So yeah, independent gives you a lot of freedom, but as people are getting smarter and smarter and artists are starting to realize, I'm seeing more and more signed artists, or when they do sign, carving out terms in their contracts that allow them to do some of these new emerging things and not being tied to the kind of old world contracts that they would have signed in the previous years.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned a few of these things already with the kind of the solutions, but what maybe Sean, if you could help us understand, what does Web3 bring for musicians and for fans and just for the music industry in general? Trent already laid out a couple of, or alluded to a couple of these things that Web3 kind of has to offer. But obviously you guys are very involved and have been for half a decade now in the Web3 space, trying to, match up some of these things. What does Web3 bring?
I think like a lot of what we've just been talking about is the current music industry environment. We're not just talking about Web3. We're talking about social media, and if you get signed to a big label, the label's going to go out and use exactly the same tools that you can sit down and use from your bedroom anyway when it comes to marketing your music and all of that sort of thing. They've just got better connections, bigger budgets, more reach. So in this world where anyone can write a song in their bedroom, put it out from their bedroom, and get it out to pretty much every person on the planet, it's never been easier just to get music out on the internet. And until Web3 came along, converting those plays and views into some substantial income and creating like a meaningful relationship with the people that are consuming the music on the other end of the computer or the phone, it was kind of difficult. Like, unless your streaming numbers were really adding up, or you've managed to put together like a really good Patreon account or something like that, aside from selling a bit of merch or booking tickets to a show, there wasn't a great way to convert that into income. And so what we're seeing now, especially with just kind of bedroom artists or up and coming artists, is that you obviously still need to get your music out on all the major platforms and make sure that people can play it anytime they want. But if just a handful of those fans that you've got are willing to buy an NFT copy of your album or support you in some way, the instantaneous nature of how revenue can be distributed through Web3 is really meaningful. And there doesn't need to be any middleman between the artist and the person that's supporting them. And yeah, we know even with labels, we touched on, labels moving into this space as well. And the discussions that we've had is like, typically a record label will sit on the revenue from an artist for about a month or so, in order to do their marketing budgets and so forth. And the people that I've been talking with, and management companies and everything as well, is that they're looking at saying, hey, your traditional revenue goes through the normal traditional channels and comes in through a distributor and comes in through the PROs and whatnot. But your Web3 revenue, if you're selling NFTs or getting streamed on a Web3 DSP, that can just come straight to you, and we can set up a split in the wallet so that the agency or the label get their cut. But there's actually like a real-time flow there from the people that are supporting you. And so whether you're signed or not, this technology is enabling things to be faster, more transparent, and more efficient, which ends up meaning kind of more dollars in the pocket of the artist.
Yeah, awesome. What are some of the drawbacks, if any?
Well, I think there's loads of drawbacks. I mean, we're seeing massive pushback from artists. We're seeing massive pushback from fans. It's confusing as hell. We've got artists rushing onto platforms that are only live for a year and then they disappear. People's wallets getting hacked. Fans, buying something that they've been told is really valuable, and it's really valuable for a few days, and then it's not worth anything anymore. And it's messy. It's so messy at the moment. I'm not surprised at all. When fans and artists are kind of pushing back on this technology movement, because if you don't fully understand the potential of it and you don't fully understand where things are going, there's a lot to hate. And that's just the reality of where we are at the moment. And guys like ourselves are out there trying to educate people and push things along. And one of the reasons that we created MODA was, to just try to bring people in the industry that cared about this technology together, so that things could be pushed forward in a sustainable and meaningful way, and that some of those music industry processes and things that have been in place for decades, the ones that need to be respected are respected, and we're only breaking rules that really need to be broken. So yeah, there's so much exciting stuff happening, so much potential, but yeah, the list is long if you say what are the drawbacks.
Well, so maybe if we tackle it from a different perspective, Trent, maybe help us understand what are you doing to try to mitigate some of these drawbacks?
Well, some of the stuff that we've been building over the last couple of years, I guess, M&A was the first one that we sort of built and started building in 2017, which was around real time payments with streaming. So basically meaning any audio that was streaming across M&A, people were getting real time payments. Splitting those payments between everybody involved in the creation of music. With MODA, we've been tackling a lot of different things. We're doing everything from we've just completed an audio fingerprint that basically creates X and Y coordinates of a song, and then we're basically hashing that, and it creates a visual representation. Which is then hashed on chain as a single source of truth. So the ability to track the data and follow that, which we're trying to sort of integrate within the music industry is a kind of a standard, a watermarking for Web3 music. The things that we saw really kind of early on was there was a lot of things coming out sort of around sort of NFTs, but there wasn't really much of a standard. People releasing stuff in video format, people basically not putting any metadata behind songs. So getting really, really messy. And I think what sort of the things we're doing over MODA is looking at how we can sort of clean up and try to make these things simpler and easier to understand. We've also been doing artist grants recently, helping individual artists come and get involved in Web3. Whether they're wanting to do a Web3 album, they want to launch something. We've been helping through that sort of creative process. And one of our latest ones is we've just sort of developed a nightclub called Verse in Decentraland, sort of giving artists the opportunity to start experimenting within the metaverse and doing live shows and creations. So we've done a few of them with some prominent artists and various parties, and we're continuing to sort of look at the ways that we can provide tools and provide value to the community and have them be involved in the process along the way.
Can I
I
ask a
think like
question
a
to you, Trent? Sorry, can
Sure.
I just ask one question on that? On those virtual performances, I heard that
Mhm.
there's a trend now that labels are reworking some of their deals to include name, image, likeness rights inside of the label deal so that they can then control the virtual or environment, like the performances in virtual environments or digital environments. Um, is that in fact happening, or is that just rumors from the
No,
street?
no,
And
no, definitely. I think there's more and more things coming into to new contracts that we're sort of starting to see. Trying to control the IP of likeness and everything like that. And we're seeing it around sort of NFTs in general. So yeah, I have heard of more and more contracts being added around sort of the virtual performance space. It's quite interesting at the moment around that. Like I think a problem that we're also sort of seeing is I guess performance royalties and how do you pay artists whose music is being used in these spaces. I think that's quite a big elephant in the room that's sort of starting to appear, where you're having all these sort of concerts and people doing live shows and everything like that, but you're sort of cutting out the PROs and performance rights organizations here. And there really isn't any plumbing at the moment to be able to sort of fix that issue. So it's something that we're trying to solve, and try to make sure that when these shows are sort of happening, there is a way for artists' music that's being played. There is a way that they can get paid as well. It's a little bit of a wild west. Anybody can go into these sort of platforms like Decentraland and Sandbox and use various pieces of music, but when it comes to, I guess, the payments being made, I can see how that for sort of the record labels will start to sort of bubble to the surface in the coming months and years.
not
I
just
think that's
that,
going to
but for
be
them
that's
to
going to
be
be
able
like
to go ahead, Sean, and then I got something to add.
oh no worries, man. I was just going to quickly say that like with like the rise of AI, the name, image, and likeness stuff will have to be on every single contract, because if there was a video going around a couple of weeks ago with a guy that generated a new Eminem track by telling Chat GPT to write Eminem, like
Right.
write lyrics in the style of Eminem, and then used a voice emulator to basically like rap it and then put that over his own beat. And like that sort of stuff's just going to start happening constantly. So if the name, image, and likeness isn't in the deal, how are you going to monetize AI produced songs that use your voice that you haven't even been a part of writing?
Yeah, and it depends on whoever, if labels or if any other third party is starting to take right to your name, image, likeness, voice, we can add to that, and they're able to monetize against that. I mean, I can understand why they're getting into the touring space. When you look at somebody like Lil Nas X or a Travis Scott or Ariana Grande, who have done these Fortnite activations, and they basically toured to 20 million fans in a weekend. And if they're able to then charge a ticket price on that, they're able to put virtual merchandise around that and any other sort of commerce around that. Well, then the labels are in the touring business in a major way. And especially if they own that name, image, likeness, voice, well, then, hey, they're accessing a gigantic piece of business there. I think it's important for the artists themselves to do their scans and actually trademark or copyright that name, image, likeness, voice. And so if anybody else wants to use it, they would have to license it from that artist. And those transactions can be done on a blockchain. But if they are used without the approval of that artist, well, then they actually have a defensible position, because as I've heard, deepfake, and maybe deepfake is going to start covering the voice stuff too, but deepfake is actually covered with under the parody law. And so if you don't have a trademarked name, image, likeness, voice, then they can do that to a certain level. But if you've already trademarked it, then you can go after copyright infringement, or if they can go after copyright infringement, and they can actually send a takedown notice for that. So it's both a defensive move and an offensive move at this point for artists.
Yeah, right. Is there any kind of, like, for example, if I was to put up or share somebody else's music video or somebody else's film or whatever on YouTube or Spotify, DRM, searches would automatically flag it, take it down, etc. Is there anything like that at the moment for faces, voices?
Not that I'm aware of. I did read something about what Andy was sort of alluding to about basically putting your name and likeness and your voice encoded and had that hashed on chain as a kind of, an IP right essentially for that. But no, I haven't really sort of seen anything from a watermarking, being able to watermark your likeness and image and have it taken down. I think anything at the moment would just be, sort of cease and desist letters from trying to find a way to sort of close that channel down. But yeah, I don't think there's anything running automatically at the moment. It'd be interesting to see what happens with sort of AI stuff, like uploading that to YouTube, and as the one that Sean was saying, with Eminem, it's like whether that gets picked up as sort of infringement and like how much of a likeness. But I guess, yeah, that would involve somebody uploading that piece of content and tagging and saying it was sort of Eminem. But yeah, it's a pretty deep rabbit hole, I think, at the moment with AI. People are feeding. I saw somebody feed, was something like 200,000 hours of music into, sort of an AI, AI machine learning, and then basically typed what type of style, and, you say, hey, I want a Dr. Dre beat with, an Eminem, and, basically a song's being pushed out, and you start sort of questioning, going, okay, well, you've used that inspiration, even though they sort of didn't write it. Like, there has to be something sort of to be said about where the influences come from, and where, I guess royalties, it's only a matter of time before we see some, number one song that was fully AI generated, and there is no, artist or musician behind it. It's somebody sort of who's created something in their bedroom that's taken off. And then I think that's where the question lies, like, has it been influenced enough from somebody else's, piece of work? And, whether you can argue that in a court of law is going to be very interesting.
But Trent, if all art is in some sense derivative and developed by an intelligence, usually by a human intelligence, but in this case, it's been developed by a kind of intelligence that was developed by human intelligence, could it not be said that that is a unique piece of art? Derivative, but so is, or even formulaic, you might say, but so are most of the top-selling songs. They're fairly formulaic.
Yeah, 100%. But yeah, I think as I said, I think it's kind of nearly opening Pandora's box. But I think it'll be interesting to watch that sort of first sort of case appear, and how it's handled, and what kind of judgments sort of handed down for something like that. I think it's a very grey area when you start looking at what you're inputting to get something out as well. Could play a sort of major part. If you're writing a song in the style of X, Y, Z, you're essentially saying you're using somebody's sort of name, likeness, and sort of voice to create something, which I think is interesting.
Yeah. Freaking, like, let's come back to Web3 for a minute. Andy, tell us which kinds of artists, or if you can name them, the artists, are looking into the Web3 space. Like, who is doing this? Why are they doing it, and how are they doing it?
Well, we saw a rush of A-list artists sort of releasing NFT projects over the last year and a half or so, most of whom did quite well, to be frank. Some of them were surprisingly didn't do well. Have over 100 million followers, but followers and fans are a little bit different, right? So I can listen to that music, I can follow that person on Instagram, but am I going to go buy a ticket to that show? That ticket to that show, that indicator of fandom, is kind of like, would I buy that NFT? Of course, depending on how it's priced and sort of what is sort of the overall value of it. So I think some artists, some of these A-list artists who felt they had these giant audiences, didn't really have as many fans as they thought they had. So that's been really interesting. But I think where it's gotten really sticky is how Trent and Sean were also speaking to it, is about emerging and sort of mid-tier artists, and that this becomes a non-traditional revenue stream. And, it's a way for them to stay independent for longer if they choose that path. And remember, it's also them owning, and I think Sean was talking to this earlier, was owning a very large majority of that revenue stream. And some of these traditional revenue streams, I mean, it gets split with maybe a label, maybe a distributor, you know, there's all these different service providers, you know, you're splitting it with all your different writers and all these different things. And so by the end, you're maybe getting 10 cents on the dollar, or you're getting 5 cents on the dollar. But with these sort of non-traditional streams like digital assets, you're often owning 80%, 90% or more of that revenue stream. So even if the total volume isn't that large, your piece of that volume is still very significant. So I think we're going to see, there's a lot of tools right now being built for sort of emerging and sort of mid-tier artists. And I think that the A-list artists will come back, but when it's extremely safe, I think that it'll be in around like ticket stubs that people can then flex on their Instagram as I went to that show, and maybe that ticket stub is an NFT that collects some additional perks or content beyond that show, but it'll be in a very safe place so they can get away from the cash grab sort of narrative that happened over the last year and a half.
Yeah, 100% there. Like I think FTX didn't do any favors for celebrity endorsements over the last sort of three or 4 months. You know, we saw Tom Brady and, you know, plenty of others sort of A-list celebrities get caught up in that. And, you know, we've seen it, you know, with, you know, big tier musicians that, you know, we're ready to do something, and all of a sudden just like, oh, no, we're not getting involved right now, because, you know, like it affects their brand if it all goes south. So I think you're right, Andy. It's going to be a while before we, you know, see them sort of come back. I think there's, you know, they'll experiment. You know, we saw the, you know, the heights of that sort of 2020 when it all kicked off. There was a flood of artists that made crazy money off their NFT launches, but they kind of just, you know, they sort of set and forget. They sort of did it and dropped off and didn't really nurture their communities at all. And then, you know, we've seen a few album launches. You know, we had Kings of Leon, you know, do an album launch. Was probably one of the first ones that was quite successful from an NFT perspective. And there's been a few others, but yeah, I think, yeah, you're right, Andy. It's going to take a while before we see those big cats sort of get in. But where it gets really interesting is for that musical middle class to start evolving. The ones that, you know, really don't have anything to lose, they're ready to, you know, start nurturing and building an audience and start connecting. And that's, I think, where the real power of it is. And that ability to collect music, you know, we talk about it time and time again. You know, there hasn't really been a time for anybody to be able to sort of collect music other than, you know, if you're a vinyl collector, we're seeing huge increases in numbers. I think it's, you know, the highest numbers it's kind of ever been. It's sort of off the charts. They can't pump out vinyl quick enough at the moment, which is super interesting, which is showing there is some sort of collectability around that physical side of things. But I think, you know, we're going to hit a moment. The last time I could really collect music was with iTunes, and, you know, my iPod was pretty much the collection. Other than that, I haven't really been able to do it. So when you open up this sort of paradigm shift of, you know, collecting new artists and, you know, owning that track, you know, before they got signed to this, I think, you know, we start to sort of get a really interesting mixing pot of flexing and reputation and fandism and, you know, secondary trading market that, you know, is very sort of hard to do in a sort of physical sense with sort of music, you know, music memorabilia. And yeah, I'm sort of the strong believer that the, you know, music is that sort of next evolution. You know, we're seeing kids, if I had said to you 10 years ago, people are going to buy, you know, change your character in a video game and wear a hoodie and pay $20-$30 for that, like, you'd go, you are absolutely mad. And I think, you know, what we're going to see is, you know, that evolution of people starting to collect. You know, it's got to work out a few of those kinks, but, you know, I think once the sort of flywheel starts going and you have a breakthrough artist, I think that's one thing that's really missing. You know, we haven't had that sort of Web3 Justin Bieber moment where some person, you know, who comes out of obscurity, out of their basement, that was making music, and all of a sudden is in the top 10, and everyone's, who's this person? You can only get his music by, you know, getting his NFT album, which he dropped on, you know, OpenSea or one of these sort of distribution angles, and it's not on Spotify and it's not on Tidal and it's not anywhere else. I think that's where you start to really see that evolution of like collectability and fanism and patrionism and supporting artists. So I'm kind of really looking out for that kind of next wave that kicks it all off.
Anyone on your radar?
I think you will see that.
It's not just a vertical, right? It's not just a revenue generating vehicle, but it's also ad tech. So you can actually, once you have made a little bit of money or even given free to own, you carry that audience with you to the tours, to merch to all those other different revenue streams that Trent and Sean have already spoken to. And like that layer of ad tech and that sort of that NFT acting as a cookie and tracking sort of that fans' behavior across all the traditional platforms, as well as their consumer behavior, even offline. All of that can go back to that cookie and kind of inform that cookie of that fandom. And for the artist to then go be able to reward those analytics or reward that person based on those analytics, well, like now you're tying every single revenue stream together. So this kind of digital asset, I'm excited by it because it's not just a vertical, but it's also a horizontal layer.
Yeah, I think you're going to see, like within the next 3 to 5 years, the audio NFT specifically, the ecosystem will mature around audio NFTs, and I actually think it'll just be standard for an NFT format to be released alongside the streaming release and alongside digital downloads. When this eventually starts going through the distributors, it's just not very mature yet. But you know, if Spotify just started kind of having a little get the NFT button right underneath the track that you're streaming, you know, people would just jump on it, and it wouldn't be like an NFT drop anymore. It would just be a song that's being released, and you can stream it, listen to it on YouTube, buy a digital download, or buy an NFT, or buy the vinyl. You know what I mean? And it's just a piece of the pie around recorded music.
So you reckon once the NFTs and blockchain kind of fades into the background, just we're used to it, rather than it being the key feature of like, check out my new NFT drop, it's going to be much more like, what's this, ubiquitous in that kind of sense? You think it's going to be much easier to engage with NFTs and actually experience the real value of NFTs and Web3 in the music ecosystem? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's just it's inevitable. Like there's a reason that Web3 is booming, and it's because it's like extremely powerful, extremely versatile technology, and it's going to be integrated with the music industry whether you like it or not. And sometimes it'll be at the forefront where you're buying an NFT, and sometimes it'll be in the background where your streams are being, you know, recorded on a ledger somewhere. But yeah, it's going to happen regardless. So I don't think it's really like a question of if, it's just more of a question of when.
And some of the stuff
that you think someone at I was going to say, you think someone at Spotify is currently thinking like someone at Twitter was thinking a year ago, and someone at Instagram was thinking a year ago, oh, we've got to get onto this now? Is that actually happening?
100%. They've tested it. Like there's been a couple of artists that have been able to link NFT drops to their Spotify profiles. That they would have a huge Web3 team. All of the labels have got Web3 teams. You know, it's everybody's working on it. It's just a question of when you release it.
It's also a question of aligning incentives, right? So we have to make sure that these large companies who have these very baked in infrastructures and very baked in relationships, and they all have their incentive structures, which are not always so visible, as long as they can apply this technology in a way that it aligns with their existing incentive structures and their stakeholders' incentive structures, then it will catch like wildfire. And I think that's what is this process now, is this R&D process now, is like trying to figure out how to bend this technology to make sure it fits within kind of an existing system, at least for those larger corporations.
If it cuts into your business model, you're not going to go and do it, right? And I've heard firsthand from like huge artists that that want to do NFT drops, and you know, it's gone to the label, and like, you know, right at the top of the chain, that it's just being shut down because they're like, we know what's going to happen when this technology is, you know, when the cat's let out of the bag, so to speak, and we're just going to keep it in the bag for as long as possible. You know, we've heard that pretty much firsthand. So it's there.
Yeah, right. Okay, so Trent, maybe help us understand, what is MODA DAO working on in terms of solving some of the problems that we've kind of exposed today?
Well, I think, you know, one thing is trying to create an education framework around, you know, making it a safe place to really understand sort of what's going in with our sort of community and being part of the DAO. As I sort of touched on before, some of the toolings to for artists to be able to come in and experiment and sort of try. So a lot of the things that we've sort of been doing with MODA up until this point in time is around sort of education and bringing people, helping, basically holding their hand and, getting familiar with the tech and realizing what they can and can't do. We sort of realized quite early on that there was, a big gap in that space. And that was kind of the original sort of, I guess, framework for MODA of, bringing together community and like-minded people and looking at providing tools and, access to artists to help them build that journey.
The big challenge, Don, is that the fundamentals that make Web3 important do not match very well with user experience, and like the whole boom of the internet has happened through it becoming easier and easier and easier to use, more and more accessible, faster and faster and faster. And Web3 starts to lose its power if you strip away fundamental things around, control over contracts or control over keys and custody and those sorts of things. So the real challenge at the moment is keeping just enough of the fundamentals and being able to fuse it with really, really good user experience. And, I think some of the things that have slowed the growth of Web3, particularly with music, is that it has come from a very, like, Web3 and crypto blockchain in general has come from a real fundamentalist place initially, that kind of libertarian, not your keys, not your coins kind of mindset. And that doesn't necessarily translate towards like revolutionizing an industry. So I think the next wave that we'll see over the next few years will be really, really smart technology solutions that enable people to easily buy music, easily release songs on chain and so forth, without needing to go into a complex kind of MetaMask setup and so forth, whilst also having control over the asset and maintaining some of those fundamental things. And we're starting to work on a bit of that with MODA, and it's kind of always been at the forefront with Emanate. But it's still, we're just right at that cross section at the moment in Web3 in general, where it's there's lots of great solutions out there, but some of them kind of throw all the fundamentals out the door, and there's some really great fundamental solutions that just are really hard to use. I think the next few years is going to change that.
And we're seeing that happen at such a rapid rate as well. Like, from what we've seen in the last sort of 5 years in this space, for what you could do in 2017 versus what you can do now in 2022, is just a huge shift. The ability of sort of on and off ramps, the ability of, using things like OX splits and contracts available and things like that. So the tech is moving at a rapid rate. It's just, it's just not instant. I think we've got a couple more years before we sort of really work out that kinks of usability and on-ramps and custodianship and those things that sort of Sean was sort of alluding to. But it's definitely being worked on, and it's definitely happening, and it's on its way. It's just a matter of, how quickly these tools are developed to make the journey more seamless.
Okay, so we're looking forward to that. That's definitely coming sometime in the future. What are we looking forward to this year? What are the trends? What excites you about where we're at right now, or we can see in the immediate future, if any?
I think like we are going to see this year. I don't think it's going to be like a crazy year for Web3 and NFTs and in crypto in general. I think it's going to be just another year. But we'll see some of those good UX solutions. I think, it's hard to say. Like, you never know what's around the corner with Web3. Like, even though we've sort of been in this space since 2017, we didn't necessarily see how quickly the NFT boom was going to hit in 2020. Nobody necessarily, saw the DeFi summer coming when that all sort of hit. So, you just don't know what's around the corner. It could just be something that no one's ever really imagined. You know what I mean? I don't have the crystal ball when it comes to those sorts of things.
Yeah. I think we're just going to see more around sort of, looking at sort of streaming, decentralized streaming platforms. More artists, doing NFTs, more albums being released, and I guess more fans having control. Like, we're already starting to see. Recently there was a whole festival that just has done a section of their ticketing, a global festival company, and basically buying it gave you lifetime VIP access to whatever location around the world that you kind of wanted to go to. So I think we sort of start to see those kind of drivers, and as Sean said, that unexpectability of what's going to happen. Something could come out of the woodworks that no one's sort of prepared for. A huge artist could drop an NFT album, and all of a sudden everybody wants to drop an NFT album again. The tides quickly change in this space. Depending on what the kind of new narrative is.
Yeah, I think that I think there'll be a lot more kind of free to own NFTs, and I think it's kind of a correction from where the cash grab sort of environment we were in, and especially for emerging and mid-tier artists. I think they want to use the technology to develop a relationship with their fans rather than just monetize. And so I think that we're going to see a lot more free to own, and then people sort of like feeding that with benefits and, maybe options to buy into a particular tier, but not require. So maybe a freemium to own. How about that? Then the only other thing, it's kind of off of this topic, but I think it'll be a bigger year for brands. I think there's a lot of brands that are out there experimenting, releasing stuff in very kind of controlled settings. I read a statistic that 161 brands released 247 NFT collections in 15 different industries across 21 blockchains just last year. So while we were kind of really focused on the really high-priced NFTs, there was a number of brands and a number of industries that were playing around with enterprise solutions, playing around with ad tech, trying to understand, can they use this technology for consumer acquisition, for loyalty, retention, just engagement, product seeding, like just, a feedback loop to do early product testing. Lots of little things like that, which are not of huge consequence to the brand, but are very kind of like R&D, but kind of like prototyping in public. And so I think that we're going to see brands sort of double down on this in the next year.
Yeah, but we've also seen it go quite wrong for brands. Like one of the recent ones with the Porsche NFTs. I don't know if you caught wind of that. Yeah, that was sort of a Web2 sort of company trying to push into the Web3 landscape. They dropped a heap, I think it was 10,000, Porsche NFTs of essentially photos of cars, hoping to sell those 10,000. I think they sold about sort of 900 of them, market tanked, became a bit of a use case of how not to sort of come into the space without sort of understanding the community. But then we've seen some really cool stuff like, Stickman I think was done by Boss, Bose sound systems. And, as you said, seeing more of those sort of experimentations with brands. But if you get it really wrong, it probably can come back and bite you in the ass. The Porsche one was, that got quite a lot of sort of hype, maybe not to probably the Porsche people or anything like that, but within the Web3 ecosystem, there was sort of a lot of flack about, really understanding kind of what you're doing. It's not as easy as just, hey, cool, let's just mint a couple of NFTs and throw them up and, make $10 million and, sail off into the sunset. It's the brand side. I think, like I spoke to someone the other day, like, KPMG, building something in Decentraland, and it's kind of interesting. We supplied the music for Tennis Australia for the Australian Open in their Decentraland and hosted parties for them, and so you're even seeing that sort of sports angle, and then obviously them bringing their brands, with their sponsors that are starting to be all scattered through Decentraland as well. So the brand side, I think you're definitely right on there, Andy. I think we'll see definitely a lot more of that.
They have to hire good partners, Trent.
That's exactly it. They need to hire that can sort of hold their hand and sort of walk them through that muddy water to start with.
So much of Web3 is knowing where to look. Sean, you said before, you can't. No one has a crystal ball. That's absolutely true. But we can get it into the field of view. Obviously, you're thinking music is going to be a really big one over the coming months and years. And brands, artists, you were just saying there. Are there any particular companies or artists that you think we should be looking at?
In terms of just the Web3 activity?
Yeah, who's going to be making big plays this year?
I mean, I honestly think that the people that are doing the most interesting things are the kind of independent creators, because they have the freedom to do whatever they want. Like one of the artists that we work closely with, DJ Lethal Skills, just put his music out on vinyl for the first time. But the way to get that vinyl was through purchasing an NFT, and the vinyl cover had an NFC chip inside it that kind of linked the two, so you could scan the album, limited release version. I think we work a lot with Mousetrap and 720, Dean Wilson, Deadmau5's manager, and the whole crew over there. They do a lot of good stuff, and they're just always open-minded, whether it's about metaverse entertainment or NFT drops or whatever else. They're always innovating. And I mean, I can't really sort of point to any particular major artists, like sort of household names or anything like that. I think we touched upon it, that they've become a little bit cautious for the time being. But I don't know, part of me sort of thinks that the next huge wave of crypto hype in general could very well come from like massive brands really stepping into this space. And I don't know for sure, but I think with the right regulatory things in place, you might start to see like SoundCloud tokens and Spotify tokens and those sorts of things on that level. So we'll just have to wait and see.
Andy, Trent, anyone you're looking out for?
I agree with Sean's sentiment around sort of some of the stuff that Mousetrap are doing. I think there's a big play sort of in the ticketing space that's sort of starting to appear as well. That's kind of will be interesting to watch. The other ones sort of around various artists. There's a few artists that are starting to sort of like slowly break through and really own the sort of Web3 space. Daniel Allen probably so far has got one of the sort of strongest independent artists that's sort of starting to emerge. There's a lot of others that are sort of following. And I think from sort of sites that are doing some really cool stuff, Apache Labs, which are doing stuff with stems. You've got Sound XYZ that are doing interesting stuff with NFT drops and open editions for independent artists. You've got Royal, who's experimenting with sort of the investment side, allowing people to buy a piece of I guess the equity of a song. So there's a few. No one sort of to me, no one's really cracked the egg open just yet. We are still talking like really really small numbers when you go looking at how these the interactions with these sites and platforms. It is really quite early in the livelihood of whether they can you can turn these things into a profitable business and a long-standing business I think is still yet to be decided. I think one of the biggest, challenges that you face in this sort of technology space is, the cost of, developing and the cost of good developers and general operations, and, then also working out how you're going to make a viable business off the back of that. You can only sort of, I guess, rely on funding and things like that for sort of so long before, you start to ask the question, okay, how is this going to keep on, being a profitable business? We saw, Mint songs sort of disappear, sort of midway through sort of last year. They'd raised 3 or 4 million funding the year before, so it's a hard game. But yeah, they're the ones that I think are really sort of sort of standing out at the moment. But I think there'll also be many more that we don't see. We could be sitting back here in 12 months' time and talking about a totally different landscape. And I don't know, maybe the next Spotify is going to appear in that time for Web3, or maybe we're going to be talking about something totally new. Like the whole Web3 gaming space is something that's sort of pretty interesting at the moment. And even how music interacts with that space. The guys Pixel Links of doing some really cool stuff around gaming. You've got Alluvium in Australia doing things. We've there's Zrun in Australia as well. We've been providing music for that platform. So there's also the piping to all these sort of metaverses and things like that are still being considered of how you get proper music and licensed music into all of these gaming environments and do it so in a way that you're not going to end up at the other end of a courtroom.
Well, yeah, I would agree with what these guys are saying. I think from the metaverse side, I think that we're still in sort of like the Netscape era of metaverses. I think that the one that will end up being the one that we all jump into and use, we haven't even seen yet. On the streaming side, I'm pretty bullish on Napster. They're back. They've always been sort of a bad boy brand in music, and now they've recently made some announcements which are pretty exciting and very kind of Web3 native. And so they were the peer-to-peer guys at the very beginning. And then when Spotify and Apple Music and the rest of these DSPs came in, they kind of knocked all that community and peer-to-peer right out of that whole experience. So if Napster is able to build that back in, they have the brand that everybody recognizes, the brand for doing such. But if they're able to put the tooling and sort of all the features behind that, with all the music, they have just as much music as any of the other major DSPs. So I think that they've got a real opportunity there. And then as far as artists, you got to give a shout out to Timbaland and Beat Club. They're really focused on independent producers making, collaborating, and exploiting, commercializing their music in the way that, they don't have access to record labels. And so these guys are building a SaaS platform that gives them all the tools that a record label would give them, and they can actually kind of be independent. And you've got Timbaland, who is the GOAT, and that's undeniable. But he is also now out there trying to make the next 1,000 Timbalands or 10,000 or 100,000 or maybe even more. So, it's a cool purpose-driven business, but obviously, a big revenue opportunity for them too. And DJs, they tour what you guys would know, 270 nights a year. That's a guess. Those are the guys who are out there pushing live, interacting with fans, putting out the most amount of content on the most consistent basis, and being in those cities more than any of the other acts out there. So if anybody can sort of help push art and music to fans, I think it's always kind of DJs are on the front of that. And then the ticketing to behind that. We'll shout out Ticket Ferry. They've got a really cool ticketing solution. So yeah, I could keep going, but there's a number of really exciting places, companies, and I think that's the point of why we're all here.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, anything you want to have said that we haven't said yet before we wrap up today? Obviously we could keep talking for a long time.
No,
too much.
You said too much. Right. Well, in that case, Trent and Sean, if people want to find out more about you personally or MODA DAO or what you're doing, how can they find you online? How can they find more information?
I think the best place to start is with my Twitter. I've got a Yacht link on there, which has got a link to all of the stuff that I do. It's a pretty good place to start.
Yeah, Twitter, LinkedIn, MODA DAO website. Pretty much all that.
Alrighty. Andy, how can people find out more about you and Faculty Entertainment?
LinkedIn.
All right.
LinkedIn.
Keep it professional.
It's coming back. Yeah, it's coming back. It's hot. It's trending. LinkedIn. Yeah, Andy Anderson.
All right. Well, thanks heaps for joining us today, Trent, Sean, Andy. If you do want more information, then follow the links in the respective bios on Twitter, LinkedIn. Follow our show notes. Thanks heaps for joining us on the Off-Chain Podcast.
Awesome. Thanks for having us on.
Pleasure.
Thanks, everybody.
Good on you guys. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Off-Chain. Man, it was a great episode looking at some of the intricacies of the entertainment industry and in general, music industry specifically, and how Web3 really can help offer some solutions to some very real and present problems in those industries. Thank you to Trent and to Sean and to Andy for joining us today. Thank you for listening and making it all the way to the end. So as always, please like, subscribe, or even better yet, share this episode with a friend and help us spread the word. And join us again next week for another exciting episode of Off Chain.